If you struggle with feeling guilty, then this video might help you. You should probably watch it. Welcome to my life, I guess. Welcome to Morgan talking about guilt. Side disclaimer, I cut my hair again, even shorter this time. I know, I've been feeling real risky lately. Okay, so guilt. We feel guilty when we've done something wrong. And usually that can propel us to change what we're doing, right? To be compassionate with the pain we've caused someone, and then to not do that anymore. But if you're like me, and you grew up in a really high demand religion, mixed in with a lot of childhood trauma, a lot of emotions being, leveraged against you, then you might feel guilty all the time. And you might even feel guilty in situations where you really shouldn't feel guilty, and that might make your life really problematic. So let's talk about it. I've been thinking a lot the past couple years, really, about why I feel so guilty all the time. Because I'm someone who doesn't feel guilty just when I do something wrong, but I feel guilty all the time. And I unfortunately will feel guilty in situations where I really should not feel guilty, and that causes a lot of problems for me. And I want to share with you guys, just my journey with guilt and what I've noticed and what I'm continuing to notice and how I'm trying to work through it. Obviously, leaving Mormonism triggered a ton of guilt for me because I grew up Mormon and leaving it was really hard. And there was the religious aspect of it of I felt guilty for not going to church, and I felt guilty for wearing tank tops, and I felt guilty for, getting another piercing in my ear, things like that. But then there was kind of the more social issue where I felt guilty telling my family about my beliefs, or I felt guilty discussing my opinion. To put my guilt into perspective, so you understand where I'm coming from, is that, I would feel guilty in the past. I'd feel guilty asking a waitress to fix something that was incorrect in my meal that I paid for, that is literally her job to do. I would feel guilty for asking her to do her job. And looking back now, I understand so much more about what I was doing in situations like that, and how I continue to play guilt out in my life. I'm someone who has struggled a lot personally with feeling shamed and not feeling good enough. And so I get afraid of doing anything that might cause someone else to feel ashamed or to feel not good enough. And so, I just see it play out in all sorts of ways. At the root of feeling guilty and ashamed all the time, I'm learning it's just that I am afraid that I'm not good enough, and I'm afraid I'm a bad person. And so I feel all this guilt and shame all the time, and I have to try to figure out, how to deconstruct that. And ultimately at the bottom of it all, if I could just trust that I'm a good person and trust that I'm doing the best that I can and that it's okay, to make mistakes, then I think the guilt triggers wouldn't be so strong. At least I've noticed they've calmed down as I've worked on those things. But it's still hard for me. I still find myself feeling guilty over things I know I shouldn't feel guilty for. Even things that I know that I'm in the right, that I'm doing something that's good and right, and I'll still feel guilty about it. So here's an example. Setting a boundary with a family member. For example, if someone keeps talking to you about religious stuff and you need to say, hey, I don't want to talk about that. That's something that would make me feel really guilty, especially in the past. Even though setting a healthy boundary is good for the relationship, it's so hard for me to do stuff like that. And it's often because I don't want to make the other person feel bad. I feel like somewhere along the way, between kind of the childhood trauma I experienced and the religious trauma I experienced, I started to think that other people's feelings mattered more than what I wanted or what I needed. And from there, what I started to learn was that the truth was not as important as someone else's feelings. And that bred me into a people pleaser. That bred me into lying to please everyone else. That bred me into avoiding conflict as much as possible. And it led me to feeling guilty anytime I upset anyone, even if it were for a good reason. So I often will get frustrated with myself when I notice that I'm people pleasing, when I'm not being truthful or trying to sugarcoat things or trying to protect someone's feelings. I often get frustrated with myself now because I see the pattern and I know it's an unhealthy pattern, but I'm also trying to be patient with myself because I see how badly my heart just does not want to inflict pain on people. It just really doesn't want to do that. It really doesn't like that. And I'm trying to have compassion for that part of me that just wants everyone to be happy and wants things to be peaceful, while at the same time reminding myself that saving someone's feelings is not always what's best for them. And it's not always what's best for you. It's usually contrary to what's best for both of you. It's interesting too, because when you do try to protect people's feelings, like by sugarcoating things or not being honest with them, you're kind of sending this subconscious message of like, I don't trust you to handle the truth. And that's not the kind of message I want to send to people in my life. And it's true that there are people that I feel like can't handle what I have to say, but I can't be the one to decide that for them. And the minute I decide it for them, I'm creating a rift in that relationship. So when I feel guilty, especially with like relationship conflict or conversation, I try to remind myself that honesty is more important than hurting people's feelings, which is a hard pill to swallow. But here's an example. I want to tell you guys about what happened recently with me. And from that, it'll demonstrate kind of like how I'm still working through guilt, but also how my internal dialogue is changing a lot around how I handle when I do get triggered. Okay, so I was at the park with my kids a couple weeks ago, and I have 2 little kids. They're both under the age of 4, and there was this guy at the park that had a big dog, and no problem, right? It's a public park. I don't care. His dog's on a leash. Doesn't bother me. He was showing his dog off to all the kids at the park and like letting other kids like pet the dog and play with the dog and, you know, all while keeping him on the leash, which was fine. And then he ended up bringing his dog over to where I was with my little kids, and my 14-month-old son was crawling around on the ground, and he was letting his dog just come up to my little baby. I'm a dog lover. I don't have a problem with dogs, but like this is a stranger. I don't know him. I don't know his dog. And a dog that size could kill my child in a second. So I stopped him and I said, please don't come any closer. I just don't know your dog. And he, you know, backed his dog away, and he was like, oh, my dog is so great, so awesome, and all the kids have been playing with him, and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, good for you, you know, good for you. I'm glad that he's a good dog. I don't know you guys. I don't know your dog. And he's like, oh, you know, there's nothing wrong. And I just, you know, took my kids and kind of left that area. And anyway, immediately after that situation, I felt really guilty. I felt like I had done something wrong because this guy was like kind of offended that I was telling him not to let his dog near my baby. Okay, so immediately after that conversation I had with the guy, I felt so guilty. And I was like so frustrated with myself because I felt so uncomfortable and awkward and guilty, like I had done something wrong. And I was frustrated, especially because I didn't feel like I had done something wrong. I felt like I had protected my baby in a situation where probably nothing would have went wrong, but not worth the risk, right? Don't let a strange big dog around your little baby. So I went home feeling super, super frustrated that I felt so guilty over something so small and insignificant. And I was talking to Jared about it, which is my husband, and I was explaining to him the situation and how I felt guilty and how I felt frustrated that I felt guilty. And and we do that with our feelings, right? We make like our feelings even harder to process by like being mad at the feelings that we have. It's just a mess. And I told Jared too about something interesting about the situation. And I told him about how before the guy had approached me and my son with the dog, I had thought about saying something to the effect of, you know, please don't come any closer, my son's allergic to dogs, which is a lie. And I thought about saying that, but I didn't. Instead, I told the truth. And I told Jared about that, and it was interesting because we had this conversation about how the lie that I had fabricated in my mind would have been this like win-win situation for me mentally of like keeping the dog away from my kid, the strange dog I don't know, and also like protecting this random stranger's feelings. And so even though I was feeling frustrated with myself, I kind of had this moment of compassion of like remembering like, okay, like I am just so like desperate to try to protect people's feelings that I'm getting myself into trouble here. It kind of made me understand myself better, looking at it and looking at what I wanted to say and what I did say, because clearly I was afraid of the conflict, even though, again, this is just some random guy at a park. I was afraid of the conflict because I was afraid of hurting this guy's feelings. I was afraid of being portrayed as some, like, annoying Karen. I was afraid of a lot of things. Hence, I felt guilty after the confrontation. And as I was expressing how frustrated I was with myself, I started to kind of think about how in the past, I would have felt so guilty that I probably just would have let the dog play with my kid and been like really uncomfortable with it and not said anything. And that frustrated me even more. And then it kind of dawned on me like, wait a second. In the past, I wouldn't have said anything. And that sucks. But I actually did say something. And not only did I say something, but I actually said the truth. Because I think a lot of times we lie as like a stepping stone to try to get to, you know, the truth. I said the truth. And there's no reason that I shouldn't have said the truth, because I don't think I should have gone out of my way to protect this stranger's feelings. I think it was an appropriate boundary to set, and I think if he's going to be offended by it, then that's his problem to deal with. I think that's the healthy way of looking at it, right? So I kind of went over from being like frustrated with myself, from feeling all guilty and out of sorts from the situation, over to feeling like proud of myself and realizing like how far I've come, and understanding that I feel a lot of guilt right now in my life. But the primary reason I feel a lot of guilt in my life right now is because I'm speaking the truth and speaking my opinion way more often than I ever have. And this is just a small instance, but in my life in general right now, I'm a far more honest and open person than I've ever been. And as I continue to have that courage to be open and honest, I do more things that trigger me. So I started to look at it this way. If you're a people pleaser, right? If you're struggling with guilt and struggling with feeling ashamed and trying to stand your ground and speak what you need to say, then maybe you start off with never saying what you need to say. But if that's where your starting point is, then step one away from that would be you speak what you need to say and you feel terrible after you do it. You just feel super crappy and guilty. And that would be progress. That's huge progress. And then from there, the next step would be you speak your mind and you say your opinions or set your boundaries or whatever. And you feel only a little bit crappy instead of super crappy. And then eventually, hopefully, you just don't really feel that way anymore. So it was cool for me to to look at this experience, to see that even though I was frustrated because I keep thinking like I should be further along, I should be beyond this, I should be able to handle these things better. Instead of just staying in that space in my mind, I was able to say, you know what? You're feeling more triggered right now because you're actually making more progress, and you should be proud of that and be proud of how far you've come and keep focusing on that, to propel you to, move on. Yeah, so I felt like this recent experience in my life kind of was cool for me to realize, again, I can talk myself down from the guilt, like can kind of I'm learning to rationalize myself through it. Just like when you leave the church and you're like feeling guilty for wearing a tank top, and you have to remind yourself that like, oh, I don't think the church is true, so I don't think wearing a tank top is bad. And you have to kind of do that, and I have to do that still, just like in different areas of my life. And it felt cool to see myself, instead of just being hard on myself, that I was actually able to encourage myself and say, okay, even though you're having a hard time with this, you have been making a lot of progress, and don't discount the progress you've been making, and, focus on how far you've come and allow that to encourage you to keep moving forward and to keep having the courage to speak up. Because I think the childhood I was raised in, along with the religion I was raised in, robbed me of my voice. I feel like they robbed me of my opinions, of the courage to really speak up and to be myself and to say what I think and what I feel. And I am working really, really hard to gain that back. And it's a difficult journey, but I'm really proud of myself, how far I've come, and I hope that I can continue on this journey. So tip for you guys, if you are struggling, working through guilt, remember to just celebrate any little amount of success. Like if you feel a little bit less guilty for wearing that tank top than you did before, just celebrate that and know that eventually you're gonna get to where you want to be, as long as you just keep trying and keep working through it and not just like ignoring it. Anyway, that's what I have for you all today. See you around. Thank you for our Patreon supporters, and I'll see you guys.